Hey there, how's everyone doing? Matt, I haven't seen you in a few months. I was wondering what happened to you.
I'm a lost soul.
It's good to see you. Let's see, I'm looking for George McEwen. Is he on the line yet?
I am.
Hi, George. How are you?
I'm good. I'll be there on my bigger screen in just a second.
Okay, no problem. I'm going to introduce then what we're going to talk about, and then I'm going to turn the time over to you. So thank you for your time today. We needed to work on a telework policy for the Department of Government Operations now that we're official, and we actually pushed this task to our policy committee, which is made up of individuals from throughout the department. And I can't say enough about how much I appreciate this work, because I personally can't think of anything more tedious than talking about policy and figuring out what that policy is going to be. So I very much appreciate that they're willing to do that. And this was a hard one because there are so many nuances and unique things that come up, especially now in this hybrid working world, on how we're going to handle teleworking. So this committee worked together for quite some time and has developed a telework policy. All of the division directors have had an opportunity to weigh in and provide feedback, and so it's been modified. I've lost count of the number of times, but it's ready to be rolled out now. And so we wanted to have the opportunity to first meet with all of you as managers and supervisors to go over that and give you an opportunity in this forum to ask questions before we roll it out to the department as a whole, so we can make sure that we haven't forgotten anything. And so George McEwen serves on the policy committee, and he is going to lead this discussion. So I'm going to turn the time over to him.
Thanks, Jenny. Well, I'm the one tapped because most of the policy committee left town. No, I'm just kidding. Mark Peterson is here as well, and we'll be tag teaming a little bit on this discussion. So the policy committee, just so that you're aware of, is representation from across DGO, so that there is a voice that represents kind of the workforce. And that's been part of the success of the policy committee, is you are getting different voices in there. For example, Mark will mention something, I'll say, oh, but in DTS, we do that differently because we're introverts who like our Funyuns and we want to be left alone. So when you talk about things like telework policies, it cuts across groups, and there is a lot of emotion that gets tied up into it. So we had all those discussions in I would say some excruciating detail, down to word choice, may or shall and otherwise. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure that is kind of a keynote in talking about this is that policies designed to cut across multiple groups are not intended to be super highly prescriptive to the point where there is no wiggle room or I should say allowances made for special circumstances. There wouldn't be a purpose to have a management layer if you could handle it all by policy. So please understand that even though we agonize over the word choices, we are not anticipating that this is going to catch 99.9% of everyone's individual circumstances. Mark, do you want to add anything to that? Or?
No, I completely agree. I find that, well, as through our discussions, a lot of our discussions were, well, wait, we want to empower the supervisor. We want the supervisor to be able to manage their people. And so that's part of this, higher level, 10,000 foot view that we've tried to apply to the policies. Anyway, thank you, George.
So in discussing the policy itself, there are two components I think we should go over. And one of those would be the questions that we received, and actually the policy document itself. So is Melissa online? Is she sharing the policy for people to see, or have we shared the link on that?
I think she emailed it out to everybody. Did everyone get a copy of it? Nods, yes, okay.
Okay. And then John Gardner is also on the policy committee. John, you want to wave and say hi, because we're definitely going to be deferring to you on some of these questions. So why don't we start, Jenny, if you're okay, should we just dive right into the questions? Because I'm sure everyone's had a chance to read the policy. Where would you like to go next?
However you want to lead it. I don't know if you want to give a summary first, or you just want to go into questions. You're in charge here.
Oh, that's terrifying. I think as far as this a summary goes, this isn't very different than documents that some groups have seen before in the past, such as DGO. It's designed to cover like I say, the bulk of cases, I'm having a hard time getting my system to share. Mark, can you share the document? Just put it up on screen.
Yeah, no problem. Can you see
Okay,
the telework policy here?
can everyone see that?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So we've gone through this and we've wanted to make sure that we standardized all the definitions. And as we are a unified group, there are variations of this policy that existed in other places. So a lot of this is going to look very familiar to you. In terms of the telework policy, a lot of the discussion that has been had around this is what makes this different than documents we've signed before in the past, for example, on the DTS side. The answer is not much. We've unified terms and we've cleaned up the language a little bit, but it's basically the same. Now, one of the things that I think is important that we go down to is that guiding principles. If you look at the third sentence in that, this is the catch-all. For when I said we can't cover all cases, we have active management layers between you and the policy document, and of course, Jenny as the executive director can make exceptions to the policy as allowed, under law if there are situations that are not currently captured or handled. In terms of the, let's go down to, just scroll down to the next page. So we come up with a standard set of definitions, which defines what the work locations are. And this was one of the things that people got hung up a lot on with the discussion was, what is my primary work location? What is my regularly scheduled telework hours? A lot of that came into scope. And the short answer is, where are you doing the bulk of your work is your primary work location. And that is, for a lot of us who have been doing the telework for a while, that is our homes. And with these regularly scheduled telework hours, that has generally been defined with the supervisors. And one of the things that we wanted to point out, and this was a question that came in relative to like rural work, for the program, the term rural really applies to all the counties outside of Weber, Davis, Salt Lake Summit, Utah, and Tooele County. And that's consistent with policy documents that we've put out in the past related to what is actually considered rural in the state of Utah.
Hey, George.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I think you actually flipped them. Primary work location is where you normally would go to work if you weren't teleworking, and then approved alternate work location up here at the top is where your telework location.
Thank you for the clarification. So
and we get it mixed up too, so we have to always refer back to the language here.
Yeah, when in doubt, refer to the policy. Mark, is there anything you want to highlight in the policy that I'm not touching on already, or John?
No, I think I think those are the main points, I think, in terms of these, and you'll see that these words that are defined, they come up throughout the document, and because we really wanted to make sure things were clear, we chose to define these terms just so we would be consistent, and we made an effort to this document at times had a language where instead of primary work location, it said like your office. And so we did our best to make sure to remove any of those discrepancies so we would be consistent.
Perfect. And then I give poor instruction and flip the two primary definitions, which blow up the entire document. I apologize in advance. Really, I think that from my perspective and most of the committee's perspective, and again, we've been looking at this, the policy is pretty straightforward and is not very divergent from things you've seen in the past. So at this point, I think, Jenny, to use the time effectively, I think we should probably dive directly into the questions that we've received. And then, of course, since there is a chat available, if there are additional questions that come up, we'll address those. So fortunately, we have representatives from not only the policy committee, but from HR to help explain some of these. And what I want to do is I want to just go down to some of the questions and concerns that have come up. And I'm going to start with the first question. And I think the way that I'm going to handle this is I'm going to read out the question, and then anyone who's on the policy committee or part of the HR support who wants to jump in and weigh in on that can do so. And if nobody does, then I'll start making up an answer until Mark tells me I've flipped definitions again, and then we'll get the correct answer. So the first question that we received was, and it's more of a statement question. It says, in the telework agreement number 5, what if someone did plan on doing the photo? It says, and reading number 5, it says, I will plan to do any of photocopying, paper mailing, or other duties incurring costs either at my primary work location or at an approved alternate location with my supervisor's prior approval. The question was, what if I did plan on doing it but forgot and did it anyway? Would there be reimbursement?
I'll speak to that a little bit, George.
Okay.
Certainly, John, back me up here or correct me. This is one of those circumstances where we want to empower supervisors. I think, for example, if in the past you've had in your division where you would reimburse for that sort of thing and you allowed it, handle it. Maybe it would be appropriate to do it this time and then give coaching to say, hey, don't forget our policy changed. You address it, you coach, you do what you need to do there. Obviously, if someone forgets time after time after time, that's a different scenario and one that maybe you'd want to talk to John Gardner about. So John, anything to add on that?
Mark,
No,
Mark,
Oh, go ahead.
can I add something?
Yes, please, Mary Lee.
I think, and Jenny, you can shut me off here, but I think we're treading on some dangerous ground right here because we want to create consistency across the department. And I'm going to be as careful as I can, but when you take a job where there are things that have to be done in the office, then in the telework agreement, there needs to be an understanding that there will be times that you have to come into the office. And if you are living along the Wasatch Front, then there is an understanding that that means that sometimes you have to commute into the office. And that's part of the gig, right? So like, I think that we are treading on dangerous territory if we start to say, well, supervisors, you can pick and choose who you want to reimburse. As a common approach in this department, if you have a work need where you need to be into the office, then you need to come into the office and that's part of your job.
Yeah, Marilee, I don't want to speak for Mark, and he can certainly jump in if he wants to. I don't think the intent of the policy committee is that we would let the managers pick and choose. It's that if there was a mistake made, if someone did plan on, as the question says, did plan on coming into the office and for whatever reason got busy, ended up printing something out at home, made a copy, something like that, and it's a one-off deal, then there might be a reimbursement if that's allowed. But there also needs to be the coaching that, hey, that should be happening in the office. That's not something that you can keep doing at home. If that continues to be a problem, then it becomes a disciplinary issue.
Right. And well, first off, John, you took the words out of my mouth, so you can speak for me anytime. And barely, we agree with you as well.
Mark,
I can't hear you.
Your microphone sounds muffled all of a sudden.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear
That's
me
better.
better now? Anyway, I was just saying, I agree with John and we agree with Mary Lee. So thank you.
So let's move on to the next question. And this is a statement question again. I'm going to read it in its entirety. And I appreciate that people put these in. There is always, when you talk about policies that impact your quality of life or your working situation, sometimes emotion creeps into it. And I appreciate the fact that the questions that were submitted, people were being very succinct with how they felt about things. And let me go ahead and read this. It says, as someone who was hired for a 100% remote position, telework isn't voluntary or a privilege when the position was presented as a fully remote, and we were hiring people who live multiple hours away from the office. Even if you ignore the fact that in terms of the position being changed after being presented as fully remote, I find it highly unlikely that someone living in Vernal, St. George, Moab, et cetera, is going to start working Wednesdays from the office without incurring hardship. And if it isn't enforceable for everyone, it isn't enforceable at all. I realize some of this language is likely legacy, but as the organization continues to hire fully remote and hire in areas that are multiple hours away, that language should change, or it leaves the employees unnecessarily exposed. So this I would say is the key issue we spent a ton of time talking about and over multiple meetings. And I'm not sure who wants to weigh in on this first. There's a lot of discussion and emotion tied up with this specific issue.
Yeah, George, I don't mind speaking for just a little bit on that. You're right, that is something that we considered quite extensively, and ultimately our legal counsel weighed in on it and let us know that we cannot make a guarantee that there will never be a requirement for someone to come into the office. So while there is not anything in place right now to change those that we are hiring remotely, because you're absolutely right, whoever asked this question, DGO is certainly complying with the governor's orders to be hiring remotely and allow remote work, and we're certainly doing that and complying with that, and we don't have any intention of changing that at the moment. However, there could be a circumstance, there could be a time where we need that remote worker to come into the office. Jobs do change over time. So down the road, if there is a change in that position and it then requires the employee to come into the office, we don't want anything in the telework agreement that would bind us to say, nope, we've already said they never have to come into the office. We can't change that, and they can work from home even if the job changes. So while there's no intent to make that change right now, and certainly those who are hired remote, our full intention is to allow them to continue to do that. We do have wording in the telework agreement that if that does change, if the job changes or there's significant restructuring or something else, the job could change and the position could be required to come into the office.
I'm going to read just the parts of another one, which is right along the same theme. It actually highlighted from the policy the statement: a telework arrangement is voluntary and is not an employee right. The arrangement may be discontinued for any time for any reason. And I wanted to make sure we acknowledge this individual's question, but I think John's already answered that, is that we cannot make a guarantee that your work duties aren't going to change. And if that does change, then that'll be something that will work with that individual. And obviously, nobody wants to create a hardship for another individual, but it would be inappropriate for us to make a guarantee that we can't. And so as such, I think we've answered that question, but if there's more that comes up on that, feel free to put it in the chat.
Bill Rafferty would like to ask a question, and then there's another question in the chat.
Okay, go ahead, Jill. Go ahead and ask your question. We'll return to those other ones in a second.
I'm sorry, I was starting to type it out. I've had employees come to me and ask, why does Sally only have to come into the office 1 day a week and I have to come to the office 2 days a week? And be more inquisitive about what other teleworkers are doing. And so without giving information to that employee that is specific to the other in detail, what's the preferred response?
Ooh, that's a tough one because yeah,
Do you want me to take that one?
Yeah.
Going back to the discussion that was just had about teleworking not being a right, that we have to acknowledge, and I understand this falls a lot on the shoulders of you all as managers and supervisors, that ultimately we're responsible to get the work done. And so those telework agreements are supposed to be specific to an individual. And there may be reasons why some individuals need to be here in the office more often than others based on their job responsibilities, based on training needs that are in place. There could be a variety of reasons. And so that's why the telework agreement is specific to an individual and not a role. So that way you as managers and supervisors have the flexibility to create the environment that you need in order to make sure that the responsibilities of your team are being fulfilled. Does that answer that, Jill?
Yes, it does. I was just, along the lines of, it feels like they're questioning me, like, as a, it's a right to them, like you said, and it's not right. But I was just, I guess you're looping it back around to, it's based on that specific roles and person's telework policy, and basically that's all you need to know.
Yes, yeah,
So-
it's very individualized.
Can I add something a little bit here too? There's another side of this too, and this is where, I don't think we want to micromanage, but we want to trust our managers. But I would encourage managers, if you are having people come in, you need to be able to articulate a clear reason for that. I mean, we are an agency that supports telework. That being said, we definitely see some downsides of teams teleworking, but I think in the EDO's office, we've seen cases where the manager or supervisor is calling people in to work in the office simply because that's their personal preference. And I think that there needs to be clear reasons why someone can't, so that we're treating people equally and fairly.
And Marilee, I think you hit it on the head. And Jill, to your question, if someone's coming to you and saying, hey, you've told me I need to come into the office 2 days a week, but the others only seem to be coming in one time, I think I can do my job 1 time a week. That's a conversation that you need to have with them. And just like Marilee was saying, if you can articulate why you need them in 2 days a week, then great, there's a valid reason to do it. If you can't, and the employee has good reason to say, hey, I don't need to come into the office 2 days a week, then have that conversation with them, and maybe they don't need to.
And I think the theme is, I would echo the same theme, just be equitable with the employees and the perception of inequity. We deal with that whether we're in person or not. Why do they get all the good assignments? Why do I have to deal with all the angry customers? Same situation, as long as we're being equitable across the board, and it's demonstrated when we bring people into the office. Because I've run into this, I have some teams that are very resistant to wanting to work in the office or come in even for an all hands meeting. And at some points I've just had to say, again, this isn't a right. This is part of the current work arrangement. But if the supervisor needs you, the relationship needs to be pretty clear in terms of there's a stated need. And that does lead to one of the questions that we received, and it was more of a statement, and I'm going to read it out. It says, as an employee, I have significant issues with this language. Quote, I understand that my supervisor employer has the right or has the discretion to change my schedule or work location at any time. I do know and recognize we have a lot of conversations about that would make some people uncomfortable, but we would be lying to you if we told you we could make an ironclad guarantee, and the job changes from day to day. I did not expect when I took over as the director of IT for the Department of Health that 2 days later I would be evacuating the building and issuing laptops or letting people take desktops home out of the building. Never anticipated that. So there's some fluidity, and we have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. And so to the employees who are out there thinking that and are concerned that that's going to just randomly happen to them, I don't think that's necessarily the intent here. And again, that becomes, I think I'm going to punt to John and say if a supervisor is being arbitrary with the administration of the telework policy, that's an HR complaint that can certainly be made by that individual. But if it's being equitably just administered, that's not a problem.
And HR does hear from employees who complain about it on a regular basis.
And I'm just going to add to that, George, too, that this policy, we're working through as a department with every intention that this is our future, but we also are under whatever obligation that any governor or legislature says that we can and can't do. And so we also can't guarantee that a future administration or a future legislature tells us we can't have this policy. And so we just need to understand that we're doing the best that we can with the circumstances that we're currently in. But our intention is to make telework a permanent option for wherever that it is a viable option.
Totally concur. And that's one of the things that we want to make sure everyone understands about a policy committee. It's a group full of living people, and these documents are living documents. This is not the be all and end all and forever will not change document. We expect refinements over time as we learn more about how to make this work better. And of course, the expectation is that as individuals impacted by this policy, that you'll bubble that up through the appropriate channels so that we do get that input. And if there's something that's completely onerous about a policy, that we can discuss it and amongst the committee and with the executives and see if there is a change that's necessary. So that is something that I do want to make sure people understand. This is not meant to be overly prescriptive and forever and never change. Let's go to.
Can I just add one more thing?
Sure.
Let me give an example of where it would be appropriate to tell an employee that they needed to come to the office, and it would be completely appropriate. And John, I'll fight you over it. John Gardner. Telework. I mean, I'm just gonna name the elephant in the room. Telework isn't for everybody. Like, everybody's personality doesn't adapt well to telework. And ultimately, we want our employees to be successful. And so if there is an employee who is having some performance issues, who is, kind of struggling with that competition of everything that's happening at home and struggling to be productive, then we want our managers to call them back in and have them work in the office. And personally, my preference would be that the manager or supervisor start to work with that employee if they want to telework and help create a more structured environment at home where they can be successful. But that's where coaching and mentoring comes in. That's where good management comes in. But that would be completely appropriate if there are productivity issues to call an employee back into the office for a period of time.
Yeah, Marilee, you don't have to fight me over that. We actually do that on a regular basis. And anytime any one of you come and talk to me about that, we'll have that discussion. And I'm also going to be recommending that you as the supervisor come in with them. It doesn't do any good to have the employee in the office when there's no one there to supervise them. And as Marilee said, help coach them and help them get back up to those productivity standards that we need them to be meeting. So certainly that is something that we have done and will continue to do. Again, teleworking is not a right, it is a privilege. And there are instances where that needs to be taken away, at least temporarily.
And there are times, John, I think you hit on something that's super important. And that is when you're in a leadership role, guess what? There's times you just have to come into the office. Jenny Reese just told Chris and I, dang it, you guys need to be in the office more. You need to be seen. You need to, be around so that you know what's happening. And like, I've had to dig out my pants that don't have elastic waists in them anymore. And, but that's.
I'm going to tell you, she fought me for it. And look, I have the proof here.
But
easy.
The issue has to rise above teleworking, and the issue becomes, how can the job best be done? And as leaders and supervisors, I just want to plant that idea that sometimes your job requires that you be in the office, and that is just part of being a leader.
There's nothing on that I can't back up. And this goes to the whole thing about not being overly prescriptive in the policy, is that your responsibilities as individual managers for staff members doesn't change. You just don't say, well, the policy governs all. You have to be active in working with the individuals, because productivity, we talked about this just yesterday in the policy committee. I said, some individuals have a very measurable job. For example, they do a help desk ticket. You can check their productivity every day and say, how many help desk tickets did they work through? And you have a metric that applies to that. But you may have a developer looking at a piece of code that hasn't been worked on for years. There's no documentation. And that entire 6-hour period, they may accomplish 2 lines of new code. So it changes, but that's where the supervisory layer has to be very active and engaged so they know what people are doing. It's not a passive thing. And I think that's a lot of concern that managers had going into telework was, how do I monitor people if I can't see them? Most people have adapted to that, but in the cases where adaptation is failing, where the individual is struggling, then they may need some additional help and supervision, and the policy allows for that. So let me move on to another question. It's from Paul Kearsley. It says, can there be multiple alternate workspaces, say like a home and free space address? Go ahead.
I would say yes. I mean, I don't think the intention was, once you've told us that this is where you're working, you can never ever work anywhere else. If you're going to work sometimes at a different building in free address space or whatever the case is, that is acceptable. We're not looking to pin someone down to only working from one spot. I mean, there have been times I'm taking my laptop with me, to a family member's house or whatever, and working there. That's acceptable.
Any other comments on that one? Okay, there's a question from Lisa Brown at the top. It says, if someone works at home from 0800 to 1700, but comes into the TSOB 2 days a week from 1300 to 1500, how would that look on the agreement?
You all see the agreement? And can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So, George, let me just share. So this is the agreement, and as you can see, there is already a table here to put in your time. And for example, my time would have 8 to 4:30 listed on approved approved alternate work location every day of the week, well, Monday through Friday. That's what mine would look like. And I come to the office as needed. Like today, I have a meeting, an in-person meeting this afternoon, so I'm here. Whereas Lisa's example would have that 2 days a week of 3 to 5 or whatever it was would be listed here in the office, with the other times listed here. And then if it is a situation where there's other things happening where it's a little more complicated, those are the ones that probably want an addendum to this, and that spells it out neatly and clearly.
Okay.
And I'm just going to add to what Mark said. It would be shown here. And this really is just to make sure that we're setting expectations and everyone's clear as to what it is. If there's an expectation that you're going to be in the office on these days from this time, we just want to make sure that both the supervisor and the employee are in agreement as to what that expectation is.
Absolutely.
Okay, there's a comment in the chat that reads, this is a great telework policy. Yay, we'll go with that. Oh, I have to read the rest of it though. It says, one clarification, the definition of approved alternate work location indicates that an example is free address space at a state building near an employee's home. But in the remote work definition, last sentence indicates when employee is not scheduled to work remotely, employee reports to primary work location and may use the free address workspace. The free address workspace here refers to the primary work location, correct? I'd say yes.
Yes. Good question.
It's a great question. Do we have any others that?
Yeah, George,
you missed
another one in the
more.
chat.
Oh, yep.
Sorry, John.
That's okay. It's from Wolf to everyone. It says, I appreciate that there is no longer the confusing terminology of telecommute versus telework. Regarding section 3.2.5 equipment, it is a little ambiguous on the state issued monitors, docking stations, keyboards, and mice for those in the telework agreement. You can read through the rest of the question in the chat. The short answer to that is this is not changing anything. The state is still providing that equipment for an employee to do their job. If an employee needs additional equipment, maybe due to medical issues, something like that, and they need to do an ergonomic evaluation, then they can certainly do an ergonomic evaluation. Risk does that through me. So you as the supervisor need to contact me with the information on the employee who needs that ergonomic evaluation. And then I get with our ergonomic people in risk, Janet and Byung-Ju, and then they'll get moving on that and get that ergonomic evaluation done. So additional equipment can be purchased through that process. If employees just want additional equipment that they want to purchase on their own, that they don't need to do their job, and it's not an ergonomic issue, then they can certainly, of course, purchase additional equipment if they want to, but that's not covered by the state. So the state, we provide the equipment that an employee needs to do their job. We provide additional equipment if there's a legitimate medical reason, if they go through the ergonomic evaluation.
We've got 2 more questions in the chat. We are bumping up against time. Mark, why don't you read the question that just came in, just to get some variety here.
Sure. There's looks like there are 2. The first one is from Ann Mostrander. I'm sorry, I'm not sure who you are.
Mike Ostrander in DTS.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. And John, he says, due to the nature of my team's work, our work changes from day to day. This requires flexibility on which days we will be working in the office. If our schedule needs to change from what is approved on the telework agreement, what is the best way to outline that on the agreement? That's a great question. And I'll take a stab and then let others join. My thought process is, if you have a team like that, you know it's unusual, you know it changes, then your telework agreement might want to speak to that need of flexibility and those and that schedules change regularly, and maybe work through it and have John take a look, for example, or another peer of yours to make sure it's clear.
Even more simple, Mark. I think you're on the right path. Rather than filling out the day by day, what day they're going to be in the office versus at the alternate work location, attach an addendum to it that outlines just what you said there, Mike, that it needs to be flexible, that it will vary week by week, just so that you've got it documented and everyone's on the same page and knows what is expected.
Awesome.
The next question is, will the telework agreement be a paper product or available online for submitting and signing? Don't kill trees. We can do this all online. We have that technology and we will facilitate it electronically.
Yeah, it will be on Adobe, and we'll let you know when it's ready.
We should be able to release that by the end of the week. Yeah. So we will have a e-sign process for you to use, which is really painless and takes very little time. If you're bringing up the document and heading to your signature, you can get there in 30 seconds. It's not complicated. So as our time is almost expired, let me turn it back over to you, Jenny. Thanks for letting us run with this as a policy committee. It's great to feel part of the process and to actually be bound by the decisions we're making. And that's great to have people in there and to get the buy-in to make this happen. So thank you very much, Jenny, and we'll turn it back over to you.
Can we
Absolutely.
take one more
I just wanna-
question from the chat? There's just one more
Yep.
left.
I was just gonna acknowledge that one. When an employee works from home, can I mandate that the employee has a private space at home away from potential disturbances? For example, working at a dining table where a locked meeting can take place. The answer to that is yes. We expect, and I don't remember if it's in the telework agreement or our code of conduct, but we can clarify that. But we do expect that if you're working at an alternate location, that it is still a professional atmosphere. So it should be free from distractions. It should be professional in nature, et cetera. So yes, that is something that's an expectation we have as a department for anyone working remotely. Yes.
So Jenny, can I add just one little piece to that? If you are working with restricted data, all the rules that the agency puts on you applies. So you can't leave it out, it can't be seen, can't be working on somebody's medical record in the airport. All those rules apply.
Absolutely. So again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you again to the policy committee. These are the things that we love is engaging and working with all of you to help us develop policy and help us get this feedback, because you're living it every day. So you know exactly what it looks like and can help guide and direct as we move forward. So thank you to all involved. Thank you for your time today. If you have any additional questions, please send them over to Melissa. we're going to make sure that we take all the questions that came through today. We'll put some documented responses out for anybody who missed the meeting today. As new questions come in, we'll update that because we assume that there will be a lot of questions that come in as we continue to roll this out. So feel free to send them on over and we'll get responses out. And we appreciate your time and have an enjoyable rest of your day. Oh, yes.
Can I just say something to this group? Because we didn't cover one of the things that I think is going to be one of the most controversial things with employees. And that is, in this policy, we are telling employees that they need to have their cameras on during meetings. So I just wanted to make sure that we talked about the why behind that. When you come to a meeting and you turn your camera off, it creates a listening, whether it's true or not true, that you're not engaged in the meeting. If you are in a meeting, and maybe this is coming from personal guilt, 9 times out of 10, if I turn my camera off during a meeting, I'm taking a bite of something. But anytime you turn your camera off during a meeting, it creates an impression that you are no longer engaged. So this is not going to be super popular because there's a lot of folks who don't like to have their cameras on. There obviously are times where you have to turn your camera off when you're driving. That's one of them. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there and see if there was any crazy concerns about that.
So I'm just going to add, Marilee, that's actually not in the policy that was sent out. It's something that we've talked about, but it's not there.
Oh, sorry.
So that is something though that is going to be coming. It's something we've talked a lot about, and I think even John Barron could probably weigh in here, that we're seeing a lot of agencies share concerns that, you know, when you're working remotely and virtually, that there is this lack of collaboration and team that existed when we're in the office. And one of the ways that we can advance that, or not to completely overcome it, but help, is to say, all right, if we're meeting together, we should have our cameras on so we can see that we're engaged with each other. We're not doing something else. We're not distracted. We're not on the phone responding to emails, whatever the case is. And so it's not currently in the policy, but something that is being recommended that we think is a good policy and want to roll out. So
Could I speak to this real quick, Jenny?
yes.
In the policy currently, this is the language we put. It's number L under employee duties. We say maintain appropriate video conferencing etiquette as defined by your supervisors, such as video use, professional dress, etc. Because to your point, Jenny, to Marilee's point, there are times where it might be appropriate to not use the camera, but in many, if not most cases, it is. And so there is that already in this policy.
Yeah. So we may tweak that, just heads up. All right, any other questions, feel free to send them our way. And like I said, we'll continue the dialogue, and we appreciate your time. Thank you.